Governments have been defaulting on their debts since the 1340s. Yes, 1340. That's before the printing press, before Columbus, before anyone had invented the concept of a spreadsheet to track how badly they were managing their money, or our money. And in the nearly 700 years since then, through plagues, world wars, revolutions, the invention of both democracy and, financial derivatives, which are arguably equally as catastrophic, governments have never once looked at a pile of debt and thought, you know what, we should probably just stop doing this. No, never that. They just keep borrowing.
Welcome, come in. We've been expecting you. Toodaloo!
And defaulting. And borrowing again, and defaulting again. Like a man who maxes out a credit card, declares bankruptcy, gets a new credit card the following Tuesday and genuinely believes this time will be different. But it never is. And right now, in 2025, the global debt market is worth somewhere north of $300 trillion. $300 trillion. Now that's not a number. That's a philosophical concept, wearing a dollar sign as an accoutrement, as a hat. Welcome to the video nobody asked for, but everyone absolutely needs. Let's get into it. So, hello, financially curious, quietly terrified people of the internet. Today we're going to be talking about sovereign debt, which is the polite, civilized, professionally acceptable way of saying what happens when countries don't pay their bills. And before you close this tab because you think this doesn't affect me, well, it does. It seriously does. It affects your mortgage rates, your pension, your savings, your government's ability to fund the things they promised you and what you've become accustomed to relying upon, and the general structural integrity of the entire financial system. So, no pressure, just follow along and let's keep our hands on the ride at all times. I'm Justin Bantam, this is the House of Trade. So let's go. It's gonna be a hard one, okay? Let's go, let's get into it. So, governments borrow money. That's not controversial. This is just another Tuesday. They borrow because they spend more than they collect in taxes because they're inherently incompetent. And rather than making the politically suicidal decision to either raise those taxes or, cut spending or stop giving money to their mates and friends, they go to the international bond markets via the JP Morgans, via the Citibanks, via all the good guys at Goldman Sachs. So they borrow money and they kick the can down the road. They kick the bill down to your kids, down to the next generation, down to me and you, elegantly, with a PowerPoint presentation and press releases about fiscal responsibility and about having to make hard choices and that we're all in this together. Now, here's the thing that makes government debt different from your mortgage, from your credit card. Well, when you can't pay your mortgage, the bank takes your house. Clear, brutal, efficient. When a government can't pay its debt, however, it doesn't automatically fail to play. It chooses to fail to pay. It's based on a calculation, a political calculation that would make Machiavellian himself wince. Now, think about this timeline, an imaginary timeline, 700 years of sovereign defaults. Let's compress that. Reinhardt and Rogoff, there were two economists who wrote the definitive book on all of these things called This Time is Different, which is the most sarcastic title in the history of academic publishing. But what they found was this: the countries that default are almost always smaller, poorer nations. The big economies, the ones with reserve currency status and large militaries, they tend to pay. Almost always. And I say almost. We'll come back to that word later on. There's a specific year on these charts where something unusual happened, where the spike was so big it broke the pattern, where even the rich countries started defaulting. Any guesses for when that was? That year was 1933. We'll get to 1933. We will absolutely get to 1933. But first, let's go somewhere more recent. Okay, it's 1982, and the world is about to learn a very expensive lesson about floating rate debt, commodity prices, and what happens when America decides to fight inflation at everyone else's expense. Here's the setup. Listen closely. Throughout the 1970s, oil-producing nations were absolutely swimming in money, what economists call petrodollars, and what I call an embarrassing amount of cash that needed to go somewhere, or hide somewhere. Where did it go? It went into loans, into Latin American governments, mostly via sovereign loans, mostly on floating interest rate loans, mostly in United States dollars. Now that might seem paradoxical for you. Why are they investing dollars? Well, to understand it, you need to understand Paul Volcker. Paul Volcker, the Federal Reserve Chairman, a man who stood 6'7" tall apparently, and apparently matched that energy in monetary policy and lack of foresight for the future. He decided that 1970 inflation was unacceptable and that interest rates had to do something unthinkable. They had to go up, and I mean bigly. Not 5%, not the 4% that's crushing the economy right now, 20%. Imagine your mortgage rate going to 20%. Now imagine your mortgage is in a foreign currency that just got 40% more expensive. Now imagine you're also dealing with a global recession, and imagine a commodity price crash simultaneously, all happening at once. This is what happened to Latin America in 1982, the financial equivalent of being hit by a bus. And what was the result? The result was the largest wave of sovereign defaults, which means countries going broke, in modern history. Country after country, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, all defaulting, falling like dominoes, except, it gets worse. You'd think the story of Latin America's lost decade would be a cautionary tale to the global financial system. Absorbed, learnt, written about. It was not, because by 1989, the solution to the 1982 crisis, the so-called Brady plan, where vast swathes of Latin American debt were restructured into new bonds, they generated a second wave of defaults, larger than the first, worse than the first, because when you restructure the debt, you restructure the terms. Things don't actually change on the ground, but your indebtedness gets worse. But there are some bankers in the middle definitely getting rich. Believe that. So the medicine for the debt crisis was itself classified as a default. That's the kind of sentence that should make everyone sit quietly for a moment and think about what we've actually built here in terms of the financial system, the plumbing, what we're all relying on, and how fragile it really is. And then, because apparently the 1980s and the 1990s just weren't enough, the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the official creditors found themselves holding defaulted debts, not just from the USSR, but its entire satellite network. I don't mean TV. It's like lending money to a corporation that subsequently ceases to exist, except the corporation has nuclear weapons.
Breaking news from the Capitol.
Now, here's where it gets truly interesting. Here's where the story pivots from historical curiosity to existential concern for our present moment. Why you're here. Because if you look at the database, the one maintained by the Bank of Canada and by the Bank of England, tracking every sovereign default, you'll notice something. Something conspicuous and suspicious by its own absence. The United States of America has not missed a single debt payment since the 1960s. Not once. Despite the debt ceiling crisis, despite the government shutdowns, despite the periodical political theatre where Congress dramatically pretends it might not raise the debt limit before inevitably doing so that they can get paid and all their cronies can, 1933 is the most important financial year most people fail to remember. It's where all of the cards came collapsing. It's why we are in the state we're in right now. The problem, or the solution. 1933, and the thing that America did would have destroyed any other country on earth at that time. Let's think back to it. Let's put ourselves in those shoes with some music to accompany us. It's 1933. The Great Depression is in full swing and people are dancing the swing. Franklin Roosevelt has just become president and the United States is sitting on a very uncomfortable fact. They have promised, in black and white, in the text of their own government bonds, to pay creditors in gold. Gold clauses, written directly into the contract, legal commitments, signed agreements. And in 1933, Congress passed a joint resolution that did something so brazen, it makes every debt restructuring now pale in comparison, look absolutely weak, absolutely anemic. Listen to what they did. They stripped the gold clauses from debt contracts retroactively. Not going forward, retroactively. They changed the terms of the existing contracts in mid-air, the ones that had already been signed, by going back in time, legislatively, and rewriting what the contracts said. This affected 100 billion of private debt and 20 billion in government debt. Let's do the math. In 2026 dollars, that would approximately be a lot of money. One of the largest wealth transfers in the history of human civilization. Why am I talking about this so much though? It really does matter now. It's not just a historical lesson. Similar is going to be happening now. Now, why did they do this? Why did they have to do this? Because the following year, 1934, they intended to devalue the dollar against gold by 41%. 41%. And now you see where I'm going with this video. There's a method to the madness. If gold clauses had remained in the contracts, creditors would have demanded and could have demanded repayment in gold at the old price, which would have made devaluation economically impossible. Who's trying to devalue the dollar now? Who's trying to bring manufacturing home now? What is the new Bretton Woods 2.0 playbook and the Mar-a-Lago Accord? It's just the same thing in a different manifestation. That's just crazy. Interesting. Now, this is the part of the video where I need you to sit with something genuinely strange, genuinely odd. What America did in 1933 would have been catastrophic to any other country on earth. For Haiti in the 1800s, when they tried to do the same thing, it went haywire, okay? The calculus was simple, pay or be destroyed. Haiti paid for 120 years. The final payment was made in 1947 for the debt that they threatened to default on. Latin America, 1982, the same thing. Greece, 2012, the same thing. Austerity measures, political instability, they chose to pay the debt. But for America, the land of the free, treasury auctions are oversubscribed. This is what economists mean when they talk about American exceptionalism. Not patriotism, exceptionalism. Just the empirical observation that the rules of international finance appear to contain a footnote that reads, unless it's America, man, unless all else equal, unless America. The question is whether that footnote is permanent or whether it's now beginning to change. So let me put the reading glasses on for the data moment. Let's talk about where we are right now, because the historical stuff is fascinating, but the present situation is, if anything, more fascinating. The global debt markets, $300 trillion in total debt, a number so large it essentially ceased to function as a meaningful concept. But this doesn't mean America is about to default. It almost certainly isn't, at least officially. The aircraft carrier is still the most powerful vessel in the ocean and the American hegemonic playbook. But it does mean one thing. It means portfolios constructed using dollar debt and dollar-based assets have to be aware of a few interesting things. Let me give you a simple framework. 3 questions, that's it. Question 1, where is my money and who's promising to back it? Cash in a bank backed by a government deposit guarantee scheme, which is backed by government's ability to honor its promises. You cannot control which government makes which decision. What you can control is whether you understand what's happening, whether you have hard assets, and whether you have options. Haiti, by the way, paid its independence debt to France. The compensation for freeing its enslaved population for 122 years. The final payment, like I said, was made in 1947. That's 1 year after Bretton Woods Agreement created the global financial system that we are currently inside. Now, the system was built 1 year after the last debt payment incurred by a people asserting their rights to be free and human. Anyway, like and subscribe.
Another night in the city of gold. Saw your shadow by the lamppost, counting secrets and the lines you've crossed.